Hi, I'm Miro Uskokovic, owner and executive chef at Hani's Bakery in New York City. And today we are here to make our perfect version of Hani's malted cinnamon bun. Hani's Bakery is modern American-style bakery. Oftentimes we have lines down the block and we sell out pretty quickly. Malted cinnamon bun is Hani's best seller. Sometimes by the time you make it to the front of the line, the cinnamon buns are gone. It's large and fluffy and moist and has a lot of cinnamon and like a gooey, milky cream cheese glaze on top. Let's do the first step. We are making the most important part of the cinnamon bun. So we're adding cinnamon into this bun in the form of a schmear, where we are mixing all of these ingredients together so it will be easier to spread on our dough. So we want to mix dry ingredients first, which is our dark brown sugar. We can most definitely use a light brown sugar, but dark brown sugar has a higher molasses, and it means just like a little bit more of that like toffee caramelly flavor. A lot of cinnamon and AP flour. I'm just gonna give it a quick mix. Okay, so now that all of the dry ingredients are incorporated, we're going to mix the Lyle cane syrup, which is like this like a British byproduct of processing sugar, with our butter that we just slightly melted and let it cool. Lyle syrup will add a little bit of the chewiness and the moisture to the schmear. Some recipes calls for addition of corn syrup, which is great. I find that Lyle's or cane syrup has that like a buttery toffee flavor that plays very well with the butter and with the cinnamon. You know, it is important that your butter is neither too hard, nor too soft, but it's like this beautiful tempered creamy texture. I'm gonna turn it back on and we're just gonna mix it until it comes together. So now we're gonna slowly start adding our eggs one by one. Okay, so our schmear is done and looks like frosting, and that's what exactly you're looking for. Now that schmear is ready, we're gonna move on and we're gonna make our dough. And here at Hani's, we are using a brioche dough. We're not serving our bun warm. We are serving them usually at room temperature. So we want to make sure that even when they're at the room temperature, they're still like soft and fluffy and moist. And you can achieve that by using enriched dough like brioche that has a good amount of butter. First thing we're going to is scale our flour. We are using King Arthur Special Patent flour blend, which has about a 13% protein content. It really gives you a nice structure, like nice chewy dough. Now we're going to add our eggs. We're using white granulated sugar. It's usually the best sugar to use when making dough because it doesn't have molasses, which can alter and affect your yeast and the rise. Whole milk. We are using fresh yeast. There's also dry yeast, and there's always a little bit of argument between the pastry chefs and bakers which one is better. I don't really think that there is much flavor difference, honestly. I just feel the fresh yeast is a little bit more resilient versus a dry yeast, which I feel is a little bit more temperature sensitive. So we're gonna mix our dough right now. We're holding off on adding salt and butter. Salt will tighten the dough, also affect the yeast as well, and the butter will affect the formation of gluten. So we're gonna first develop the structure before we add those two ingredients. So our dough is mixing right now. It's gonna take about 10 to 15 minutes. There are two different kinds of mixers. There's the planetarium mixer, which is kind of like an all-purpose, can do doughs, can do cakes, can do cookies. There's also something called a spiral mixer or dough mixer, which is specifically designed to make only dough and mixes the dough faster and prevents dough from overheating, which can affect the yeast and gluten formation as well as the texture. Here we do not have that because, you know, Hani's Bakery specializes in multiple things, not just the dough. That's why we're using a fresh yeast, because it's more resilient. But we are also chilling our ingredients for at least 30 minutes to an hour, and that will prevent the dough from overheating and affecting the texture. So in order to check the strength of our dough and gluten formation, we're going to do a window pane effect check, which means we're gonna just stretch a little piece of dough in between our fingers and just see how elastic it is. And you know, it's taking a while to tear, so that's a great thing. We're going to add salt, butter. We are now just gonna have this thing going for next 10 to 15 minutes. Our dough looks ready. It is pooling from the side. Also looks nice, elastic and shiny. So we're just gonna take it out of a mixer. It is important to either put it on a silpat, which is like a non-stick pan liner, or you can align your tray with a plastic wrap spray with a little bit of PEM spray, and then just put your dough on there. We're going to cover it with more plastic wrap. And we're going to bulk ferment this dough, which means we're going to leave it in a bulk as it is to sit at a room temperature for about like an hour or two. This is where the flavor is gonna be built, the structure, it's going to like double or triple in volume. Okay, so it's been an hour and you can see a difference in a dough. It has risen, nearly doubled in volume. Removing these gases that have built up during the bulk fermentation is going to allow us to get rid of those like big bubbles and create more like finer brioche dough. Okay, so now that we have tightly wrapped this, we're going to put it in a walk-in to sit overnight. It's going to build the flavor, but it's also going to build the structure, and it's going to firm up, so it's easier for us to sheet it when the time comes. Okay, here's our dough that's been sitting for about 12 hours, nice and chill, so it's gonna be much more easier for us to sheet it. So this is a commercial sheeter, somebody calls it a roller. What this is doing is just essentially sheeting out the dough to the thickness that you want. At home, you would just use a rolling pin. If you go higher number, the dough is going to be thicker. So you're not gonna have like visually those beautiful spirals that you would if you go thinner. Also, if you go too thin, it might end up being too tough and like too much schmear and become like moist and gooey. Now that we have finished sheeting our dough, we're going to put it in a freezer for at least an hour so it firms up, so the schmear and rolling part is easier for us to achieve. Our sheet of dough has chilled, so now we're going to apply our schmear. You just want to spread it in like nice and even amount all around. And that's it. And now we're gonna start rolling it. So always the beginning is a little bit harder, especially if your dough gets soft and starts sticking to the parchment paper, but after that initial roll, it just gets easier. You wanna roll it tight, not too tight. You wanna make sure that there is enough room to expand. And we're gonna put it in a freezer for a few hours until it is practically frozen. And that's gonna allow us for like easier slicing and a better shape. So we're using this like a handy tool that a lot of bakers and pastry chefs use, which is called a bicycle cutter. We're just using it for scoring. If you do not have a bicycle cutter scorer, you just use a ruler. Just good old-fashioned rulers. It's very important that all of your cinnamon buns are uniform, so they're baking at an even rate. And also you want to ensure that every customer gets the same size. So now that I've marked my buns, I just use good old knife. And this is why freezing is essential, because it cuts easier and cleaner. So we like to bake them in individual molds rather than baking them together, just to make sure they're all even. You can most definitely bake them in 13 by 9 inch pan. Some people really love that like super like gooey and like soft middle of the cinnamon bun bake. So we're using these plexiglass molds from Matfer, and you want to use something that has the bottom so that way it catches all that gooiness and schmear that could potentially leach on the bottom. These are non-sticks. I'm going to cover them with a plastic wrap. We will put it in a mold while it's still frozen, and then around 9 p.m. every night we will pull those frozen buns in a mold and let them sit at room temperature at about 70 degrees. So they will slowly defrost and proof. So by the time the first steam is in at 5 a.m., they'll be ready to go in the oven. So we're gonna take these trays in our kitchen, and then we're gonna put it in a speed rack and let it proof. Our buns are ready. The way to check is we just wanna like slightly press it. If it's like bouncing back slowly with like a little indent, that means that it is ready. We are using Rationale combi oven, so you can either like cook with a hot air, or you can steam, or you can do both. And it really gives us a beautiful puff, rise, like makes like a nice crust that it's not too crusty, it's nice and soft, and also keeps the buns super moist. You can most definitely just like use your regular home oven, which is just a dry heat. Sure, you can like spray a little bit of water or like add a little bit of water on the bottom to try to mimic the combi oven. But you know, if you're just baking it at the regular hot air, it won't be as moist and fluffy, and it might create like a thicker crust, which again will prevent it from rising and fluffing up. And now buns are done. We're gonna let it cool down for a little bit before we apply the malted glaze on top. Next up, I feel is probably everybody's most favorite part of the cinnamon bun, and that is the glaze on top. I usually find like two types of glaze that most people use. Either it's cream cheese frosting, which is kind of like thick and fluffy, or it's like a runny sugary glaze, and we wanted to kind of combine both. So we're just using good old Philadelphia cream cheese, full fat, always. And we're gonna paddle this just a little bit to make it creamy. So we're adding powdered sugar. Okay, so at this point, we practically have a cream cheese frosting. You know, we can just like rip this further until like it's light and fluffy. But as I mentioned earlier, we want to make it a little bit like looser and gooey and unctuous. So we're going to continue to add some other ingredients. We're just using regular kosher salt. So the salt will kind of help balance that sweetness. A little bit of vanilla extract. I'm a huge fan of malted milk powder, or just like malt flavor in general, which kind of gives it that like barley, toffee, buttery, slightly caramely flavor. If you're not familiar with malted milk powder, sometimes it's also called Ovaltine. It's essentially dry milk that has barley malt added to it for, I guess, extra nutrition, but also extra flavor as well. Malted milk powder is really what makes our glaze special. We have a little touch of nutmeg there just to kind of amp up and kind of tie all those flavors together. The last ingredient we're gonna add is just a whole milk. It's gonna give it like a little bit of the richness, but also a beautiful sheen to the glaze. So we make the glaze usually a day before, just to allow for the malted milk powder to hydrate and melt into a glaze. And we want to mix it until everything is like creamy, homogeneous, and there are no like lumps. Okay, so this is done. We're gonna let this rest overnight, but we already made some yesterday. So we're gonna continue with our next step. This is the most exciting part, which is glazing our buns. But we're gonna first take them out of the molds and put them directly on deli paper, because we want to make sure that all of the sticky glaze is contained. We're using just a cookie scoop to put our glaze on top, again, to make sure that it's nice and consistent. Use back of the scoop just to spread it around and let it kind of drape and fall down. It's almost 4 ounces of glaze on top. What we were looking for at the end when it came to glaze is just, again, that there's like a generous amount of it, that you can get it in every single bite. But also we wanted it to be like nice and shiny and also sticky. We didn't want it to like get like fully like hard like a frosting. We wanted to like maintain it like a gooiness, even if, you know, take it home and eat it like 2-3 hours later. And if you do take it home to eat it later, we do suggest pop it in the microwave for like 10 seconds, and it brings it to really next level. We are finally here. Our malted cinnamon bun is ready, so let's try it. You know, unless you need wet towels after eating cinnamon buns, did you really eat cinnamon bun? It's super soft, super fluffy, moist, and glaze is gooey and unctuous. The cinnamon is like super strong and spicy and like coming through despite all of the glaze. In my opinion, this is perfect cinnamon bun. There's a reason why people stand in line.